The Swiss mathematician, physicist, geographer, astronomer, logician, and engineer Leonhard Euler was born April 15, 1707 to parents Marguerite Brücker and Paul Euler in Basel. Euler's parentage, especially his father, would prove vital in establishing his life's trajectory. Paul Euler, a Protestant minister, had studied theology at the University of Basel and had to become close with the Bernoulli family, attending Jacob Bernoulli's lectures and living in his home alongside fellow undergraduate Johann Bernoulli. Though he would not himself put this mathematical training to use, his son would benefit greatly from these connections and also by learning elementary mathematics from him at a young age. At the age of 8, Leonhard would leave home to live with his maternal grandmother, attending a school so unfit for him that it taught no mathematics at all. His education in this subject was either self-taught from books or through private lessons. When Leonhard finally began attending the University of Basel in 1720 at the age of 13, which wasn't actually very impressive for the time, it would be with the intention of becoming a minister like his father. Johann Bernoulli, his father's old classmate and now distinguished professor, outright refused to give him private lessons when asked, but did allow him to visit Sundays to remedy any difficulties he'd found with his course books. Euler would graduate with his Master's of Philosophy in 1723. His master's thesis consisted of a comparison between the philosophical ideas of René Descartes and Isaac Newton. The next semester, he would begin his studies of theology in earnest, just as his father wished, but though he would be a devout Christian for all his life, his enthusiasm for mathematics was far greater. With the help of Paul Euler's old friend Johann Bernoulli, Leonhard would persuade his father into allowing him to study mathematics instead. The year of his graduation, 1726, Euler would write his dissertation titled De Sono on the propagation of sound. He tried using this paper to obtain a teaching position at the University of Basel at just 19, but was instead forced to settle for a position in the University of St. Petersburg that had been secured for him by Johann Bernoulli's son Daniel, which was freed up by the passing of his late brother Nicolaus. Despite initially delaying his commitment to try for the University of Basel position, he eventually accepted enthusiastically, finally making the move that would launch his career in 1727. He assimilated quickly to the culture of St. Petersburg, learning Russian and even joining the Navy as a medic, and within the first year had invented E. Actually, it would be Jacob Bernoulli who would first realize the relevance of the number in 1683 while studying compound interest, but Euler would be the first to write it as the letter E. One prevailing yet unsupported theory for his naming convention is that he was already using the letter A in an equation, and E was just the next vowel and therefore convenient. Regardless, the irrational number beginning with 2.71828 would be dubbed Euler's number and cemented in mathematics history. 1728 would also be the first year he'd participate in the annual Paris Academy Prize competition. That year, the problem was to find the optimal positioning for mass on a ship, and Euler won. Second place. In his defense, the man who won first, Pierre Bouguer, would go down in history as the father of naval architecture. Euler would participate in 14 more of these competitions, winning 12 of them. But all great things end. The University of St. Petersburg was intentionally made attractive to foreigners in an effort to close the scientific and scholarly gap between Russia and the West, but these policies would change upon the death of Catherine I, who had upheld them after the passing of her husband and the university's founder, Peter the Great. The new Tsar, Peter II, was only 12 and easily manipulated by the Russian nobility. The nobility felt threatened by foreign influence in the university and became hostile with non-Russian natives, eventually barring foreign or socioeconomically challenged students from enrolling altogether. In 1730, boy Peter would die, surrendering the throne to Anna of Russia, whose policies favored Euler far more. Under her reign, he quickly began accruing upward momentum within the university hierarchy. In just 1 year, he was a professor of physics and had quit the Russian Navy, and within 3 years he had taken Daniel's job as the head of the mathematics department, continuing his trend of filling ex-Bernoulli boy positions. In 1734, he solved the infamous Basel problem.
Okay, so if you add every integer until infinity, the sum of that will also be infinity. But what the Basel problem asked was what the sum of each of those numbers, the square reciprocal of each of those numbers was. And Euler's breakthrough was to realize that the sum of each of the roots of a sine graph had a connection to that written here. And then using those values, he was able to come up with that as a solution for that, which is really cool because it connects pi to infinity.
The same year, he married Catharina Cassel, a woman born in Amsterdam, and they bought a house on the Neva River. Of their 13 children, only 5 would live to adulthood. In 1734, Euler would solve the 7 bridges of Königsberg problem.
Euler had to simplify the problem significantly, and what he did was to simplify the problem down to the 2 important aspects, which was the land masses and the bridges. What he did then was to show that no matter where you went, you had to then leave that point, which means that since each point had an odd number of connections, it was impossible to then return back to that point without then leaving again on the same connection or one of the other two.
So I didn't record this, but you have to have an even number of paths to each point to have an Eulerian circuit.
And if you have that, that's called an Eulerian circuit, but the other option is an Eulerian path, which is where if only two of the points have an odd number of vertices, then you can complete the circuit with only hitting every bridge once by starting with one of the paths with an odd vertice and ending at the other. Like so.
This would mark the invention of graph theory, an entirely new branch of mathematics. In 1737, Euler popularized the use of the Greek symbol pi for the irrational number of the ratio of the circumference of a circle to its diameter. He originally used the symbol in his work titled Mechanica, though initially he used the symbol to denote twice the value of modern-day pi. In 1738, Euler would go nearly blind in his right eye for reasons unknown, although leading theories include fever and eye strain. This would be only the beginning of his vision's gradual worsening. In 1739, Euler published Tentamine Novae Theorae Musicae, a paper which attempted to integrate music theory and mathematics. Though genius, at the time it was considered too mathy for musicians and too musical for mathematicians. Frederick II of Prussia, like Peter the Great, wanted to establish his own great university in Berlin, and scouted Euler for recruitment in his efforts. Euler declined initially, but was spurred into acceptance by the Empress's death and a comparable salary. With Russia's descent imminent and his choice obvious, he asked permission to leave, citing his worsening eyesight instead of his political concerns. His request was granted, and he was given a paycheck of 200 rubles a year for his continued membership in the university. Just like his move from Basel to St. Petersburg, a position that he would initially accept begrudgingly would be instrumental in the furtherance of his career. It would be in Berlin that he would spend his most productive years and make his greatest contributions to mathematics. But, despite this move, Russia wasn't through with him yet.